Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios. And what I have for you today is an experience report about using AI tools for programming and various programming tasks. This will actually be a 2-for-1 because I will start with my own personal experience report, and then I will move to an experience report published by Elisabeth Hendrickson in an article, and we're going to compare and contrast the two experiences. Before we go on, I'd like to clarify a few things. First of all, I'm the CTO at Mozaic Works, and from this position I am maintaining the infrastructure of the company. And part of this infrastructure is our learning platform where our students can join, and even if they come to live classes, live online or live in person, they have access afterwards to learning programs. So this entails two things. One of them is the platform itself, the capabilities that I want to expand on and that I'm building. And the second part is the learning programs that we are developing, and some of them I'm developing myself. For example, I have one on architecting microservices, another one about cybersecurity for programmers, and so on. And in this context, what's important is that I know precisely what I want to do. I have 20 plus experience in programming, so I know, and in multiple programming languages, so I can write code in multiple programming languages to solve various problems that we have. So for example, we might need things like Docker containers and make files and PHP code for writing a Gutenberg block, and actually it's PHP plus JavaScript, writing a Gutenberg block that works with, that is embedded in a plugin and that does specific things in our platform. Writing learning games in Godot, using Godot as an engine. Shell scripts, plant UML diagrams. So there are a bunch of things that I need to do for the platform and for the learning programs. Coding examples and coding problems for example, for our clean code, refactoring, test-driven development learning programs. So there are a lot of things, and we're always looking to improve these things and to make easier for developers to solve those, and to have a better experience with our learning platform. And so these were the tasks that I was working on, but it's also important to understand this context. I'm not a junior programmer just starting to write code. I have a strong basis in programming. I've done C++, I've done Java, I've done C#, I've done Python, I've done PHP, JavaScript. So I know what I'm doing, right? And I know good code when I see it. I know how to change it. I know what to verify for when I see code that is written by other people, and to verify what might not be working, and so on. So I'm coming from this perspective. And now, what have I done? For the past 3 weeks, I've been using 3 different large language models. One of them is Claude. The other one is ChatGPT, Claude the paid version, ChatGPT the free version, and a locally installed DeepSeek-R1 that I'm running using Olama. And I've used these 3 for different parts of these tasks, and actually 4, because I've also used GitHub Copilot, which, okay, it's not a language model, like Claude is not quite necessarily a language model. Claude and GitHub Copilot are actually built upon large language models, but they are more, doing more than just chat. And okay, so first I'm gonna go through some observations, some things that I noticed. These tools have been very useful in finding possible ways to solve a problem, whether it's been, if I come with a specific problem, I want to do this, they would give me 3-4 different choices, and then I can go through each of those. So this would be a role that I would call an assistant researcher or a junior researcher. So a person who is able to, it would be equivalent with a person who is able to search on the internet, come up with a list of things with a comparison and so on. Now, they weren't always correct, in the sense that sometimes, and I've had this with Claude a number of times, it talked about WordPress plugins that don't exist. And maybe they existed at some point, but I couldn't find any traces of those WordPress plugins. So yeah, it's a hit and miss. So basically, you have to verify everything that they give you. It's not as easy as it seems. Now, once I had this discussion, in cases I didn't know, what option to pick, then it helped me to give these options. I could go on, check them out, and sometimes come up with my own options, because if you have a start, then it's easy to research a little bit and figure out there are other solutions. And then it helped me, once I knew what I wanted. Let's say I wanted to do a Gutenberg block. If you don't know, the WordPress now has kind of a site builder, so the web pages are not necessarily built out of HTML anymore, as it used to be for a very long time. But you can build them based on blocks. So you might have a paragraph block, a heading block, and you can expand these blocks and add all kinds of interesting features. For example, you might have a block that is hidden for parts of the audience, or that is only displayed at a specific date, or under specific conditions. And this is just a simple example, but then you can have all kinds of different types of blocks, right? That whatever you can write in JavaScript and PHP, because this is what they use. With PHP, you write the administration part and the editing part. And with JavaScript, it's kind of what's displayed, more or less. I'm simplifying a lot. So if I went with something like this, then it generated me something that worked, or almost worked. And it was very good because I had a template to start from. Now, this template was not perfect. It was often too complicated. It was often, parts of it were not working as I wanted them to do. But it's still very useful to have a starting point rather than start from scratch. And to me, what was particularly important is that I didn't have to read the whole manual about how to write Gutenberg blocks and go back to the books I have about how to package a WordPress plugin and all that. I could ask Claude to do that, and it would tell me this is how you need to structure this, and give me an example that I could start from, of course, change things. And yeah, it's pretty useful. Also, if it generated an example, then it was very easy to ask it Claude to make edits and say, okay, please replace this placeholder for, let's say, organization with Mozaic Works. And it replaced that, and basically through subsequent refinements, I would get to something that is very close to what I needed. And this was particularly useful for work like creating make files, Docker files, and so on. I know how to create a Docker file, I know how to create a make file, but these things would take me a lot more time, or would have taken me more time to do than without these assistants. Because I would have to write everything. So they managed to do that quite okay. Now, it was still too complicated and I had to revisit, simplify, and so on. So I believe that overall, if I were to start this from scratch, if I were to write this, okay, if I were to read everything I should know about makefiles and about Gutenberg and about, I would probably get to a result faster. But with these tools, I don't have to read everything about these different technologies. They give me a template that works for a first draft. And the main gain is in the fact that I don't have to read the whole thing. Also, another thing that helped is most of the examples with Gutenberg blocks use JSX and React. And I didn't want to do that. I don't want to have an additional dependency. And I could just ask it, okay, please rewrite this into plain JavaScript. And it does that. I have plain JavaScript version. It works. That's great. So there are some tasks at which these tools save a lot of time. And particularly if you don't need to read all the manuals and all of that, if you just want to build one plugin or, I don't know, 2-3 plugins, it's great. Now, if your job is to build plugins and Gutenberg blocks and stuff like that, then I think I would definitely read the books and make sure I know these things inside out. But to me, I'm not doing this for external customers. I'm doing this for us, mostly for internal use. So it's not the same thing. It's not a commercial activity, right? But if it were a commercial activity, I would take it much more seriously. Still, it's enough because I know PHP, I know JavaScript, so I could understand what it's doing without having to completely understand and read everything in order to write this from scratch. So really, really useful. But again, sometimes too complicated. And I had to clean up, simplify various things in their solutions. Now, another thing that I noticed is sometimes it would make errors. And then I would ask it, okay, let's fix this. This is the error I get. Let's fix this. And it to say, oh, okay, so I get it. This is what is the problem. And then make some changes and get other errors. So basically kind of go deeper and deeper into this, into issues instead of fixing issues. But hey, yeah, it's part of the thing. Other than that, very useful as support instead of reading the whole manual. So I could ask, okay, questions about Gutenberg blocks, about WordPress plugins and so on. And it would answer me. instead of going and searching on the internet and trying to figure out where to look, which is a good resource and so on. This gives me an answer. Now, I don't fully believe the answer all the time, but I have enough knowledge to be able to intuit which answers are correct, which are not, and how to double check once I get an answer. But it's easier for me to double check an answer that I'm getting rather than searching for an answer, because that's, at least it's more time consuming. Okay, so I have a few conclusions. It's really good as an assistant for documentation because it can give you answers from the existing documentation. It enables me to solve problems, problems that I could have solved before, but sometimes the solution that is giving me, particularly with makefiles, I've been using makefiles, but I've never learned the ins and outs of makefiles. I find makefiles very useful, but I've been using a small subset of what they can do. And the solution that it gave me as makefile, it was much more elaborate and with more features and better done than what I could have done myself. I should have read much more in order to do that. And that's not my primary goal, right? My primary goal is to solve a specific problem. And if I have a makefile that works, that I can understand, that's perfectly fine. They are good at making good first drafts and templates, right? So create a project that does that roughly, and then I need to go and fix things and make sure it works and so on. And Claude is quite good at changing very precise things. If you tell it, please replace this with this, or please, fix this part, it can do these edits, and it's really good. Translate from JSX to plain JavaScript, really good. That works. So these were the good things. The bad things, code, often too complex, as I mentioned, and it hallucinates. It still hallucinates, and we will never get away from that, right? That's part of it. So you have to double check. Now, the best thing that happened is something that has to do with psychology more than with the actual tools. So one thing that I was getting into often is that I would start working on a problem like that and do some research and start writing code and so on. But then at some point I would get stuck, and that frustrated me a lot. And so I had to take a break from that problem and often switch to something else and then go back and so on. And it's really painful to work like that, because it's just, you want to solve things and you always feel like it's taking too long. I should have been able to do this faster, or I needed this faster, and now I have 10,000 other things I need to do because this is not going as well as I wanted it. With these assistants, the most important thing that happened, and the best one that happened, is that when I got stuck, I could ask Claude, I don't know how, this is the problem I'm getting, how to solve this. And even though maybe it didn't give me the right solution, just the fact that you are having a partner to discuss with, even though it's an AI assistant, just makes things a lot easier, right? And it kept me in the flow. And I was also encouraged by the fact that it would give me solutions that were more or less adapted to what I've been doing. So I could take that, adapt it a little bit, and move on. And okay, I'm also part of my expertise is also in simplifying code, so I can do that. I've been doing this for a very long time, which means that I have no problem if it gives me more complicated code. It's very easy for me to do that part. But when I don't know how to solve a specific problem in, let's say, PHP, in WordPress, Gutenberg, all these complicated contexts that I would have to learn a lot about, it gives me something that approximates what I want to do. And this has proven a very good psychological support. So not only that it helped me solve the problem, but it's helped me avoid these psychological blocks when I was like, oh, okay, I don't know what to do. Let's take a break, switch to another project, and eventually maybe not finish what I'm doing. And now it's much easier. So I feel like I've progressed a lot. And to me, this links to one thing, which is that tools are really a way to augment your abilities. All the tools that we are using have this in common. They help us augment what we are doing. And these AI tools are helping me augment my abilities. My ability is to figure out what problem I have and various solutions, and then having the support in developing the solutions, even though the solution might not be perfect and it needs to be fixed and simplified and so on, but it's still progress, and it feels like progress, and it's actual progress because I've been solving a lot of things using these tools. And so what I want to see is augmented intelligence, which is, rather than having artificial intelligence, where we let agents do their own thing, it's more like augmented intelligence, where a person is in charge, but can put these agents to work and make things faster, better quality, and so on, through a combination, so a system of AI plus people. So this is what I want to see, and this is what I think would be a great way to progress. Now, I'm still a humanist. I like people, and I believe the potential for many people is not used, or they are not using it at the fullest. And if these tools can help use our fullest potential, that's a great thing. And I know I am very familiar with the issues with AI, right? Copyright issues and the way they have built it and the energy consumption and all that. So there's still a lot of road ahead of us. But what I have come to understand from this experience is that these tools are useful and they augment our capabilities. So it's a good thing. Now let me quickly switch to the experience report written by Elisabeth Hendrickson. She's CEO and founder of Curious Duck. I know her from, I've been following her on socials for a while. She's been very influential in a number of areas, so yeah. And let's look at what she is saying. Lately, I've been experimenting with Cursor, one of the new Gen AI coding tools. I want to experiment with Cursor as well. So I want to see how it would do with the simulations I created. The simulation is a Rails app powered by an engine implemented as a Ruby gem. The code base isn't huge by enterprise standards, but is large enough and complex enough that I thought it could put code generation through its paces. Also, I am the sole developer, so if I really mess things up, I'm the only person affected. First steps, I asked Cursor to examine the simulation engine. Talking through the design decision I made and opportunities for improvement felt like a conversation with an enthusiastic but slightly naive developer with an encyclopedic knowledge of design patterns. I haven't had design conversations with with these tools, but I've built architectural diagrams, and actually I tried. I tested out doing a domain model with, I think it was ChatGPT, but nah, it was very far away. So for all the things where you really need to think and make your own decisions, it's not working as well. And I think design fits this, architecture fits this, a lot of architectural work. Although I'm experimenting with using these assistants for architectural work, and I think there's something to be said about writing the diagrams. Those might be actually useful, and especially if you're using something like PlantUML, the automatic suggestions by GitHub Copilot are actually quite good, and they can help you. It's just another area where if you know PlantUML enough, the AI assistant can augment this knowledge and can help you create the diagrams faster. So yeah, and you don't have to search through the whole, and believe me, I read through the PlantUML manual, but it's quite big and there are so many things there. And a lot of things you need to figure out. It's they are not necessarily clear. So having these assistants, really great. One of Cursor's early suggestions was that I make a stateful part of the code event-driven, but when I pushed on why and re-explained the intention behind the code, Cursor immediately backed off, admitting, "You're right, an event-driven architecture is not appropriate here." Yeah, to be honest, when you push back against the assistants, they tend to try to please you. So they tend to say like you. At least that's my experience. But other the ideas it had were much more insightful and valuable. I was honestly surprised by the depth of understanding it developed about the code. I ended up using Cursor to generate a much better README to describe the code structure and the future directions of the engine. Win. That's true. So the READMEs that Claude created were much better than what I would, partially because I tend not to write the whole thing in a README, but just the most important parts. And Claude was much more comprehensive. So yeah. Can it fix my GUI? I'm not a UI designer, while I love fonts and I know my way around HTML and CSS and Rails partials and view components. I'm very much an amateur. Same here. So usually if I have to pick colors, I'm searching for websites that give you color schemes, and that's what I'm using. So I'd gotten the GUI for the simulation to a good enough state, but left it there. Recently, I had feedback that the GUI was cluttered and confusing. Okay, this part I know how to do because I've been very interested in usability. And so one thing that I'm striving for is simplicity, and I'm always having conversations with colleagues that want more things in a page, and I'm like, no, let's not do that. Okay. Plus, I knew that it did not work well on mobile, so I decided to see how well Cursor would do fixing the GUI. It's worth noting that the Rails app is a bit quirky because of the nature of the simulation. So even though I knew Cursor could figure out a boilerplate Rails model view controller app, how would it do with this code base? I set an initial goal for the UI work, tweak the UI to clean up the most egregious issues and make it work on a large mobile screen, my iPad. But as I started experimenting, I realized the Cursor was doing a fantastic job of understanding all the quirks of the code base. Oh, that's interesting. I decided to be much more ambitious. What if I use Cursor to clean up all my shoved in the wrong place styles, artisanally handcrafted padding and margin settings, and hard-coded div dimensions? Forget small tweaks. Cursor could revamp the UI entirely to make it more consistent and easier to maintain. Okay. So again, this is typically not a problem for me. I have long enough experience with CSS, and I've always focused on making things as simple as possible. And so I rarely have handcrafted padding margin settings. But one thing I can say is that Claude and GitHub Copilot, they helped me a lot with the styles for Plant2ML and the styles which are CSS for our slides that are using MARP. So this is an engine that converts from Markdown using also CSS. And in that situation, it's not as much about knowing how to structure CSS for HTML pages, but it's more about knowing the context of MARP, knowing the context of Plant2ML, because those are different, right? They have their own quirks, and that was very helpful indeed. Then I thought even bigger, what if I got Cursor to add dark mode? The problem was that I had to be careful about biting off more than I could chew. The simulation had to be stable next week for the workshop. Normally I wouldn't even attempt changes this big so close to a deadline, but I could time box my Cursor experiments, allowing me to throw the work away without regrets if things went badly. Spoiler, the new version of the GUI now with dark modes is in production. It turns out Cursor really can do magical things, but can also do things that make you question reality. Let's look at some of my biggest lessons learned. Yeah, so until now it's kind of congruent with what I've been saying. The good. Before tackling the UI issues, I decided to take something more foundational. My JavaScript whole reload configuration was broken and had been for an embarrassingly long time. Yeah, these are the kinds of things that are very niche, and you use them maybe once in a while, like once every 6 months or every year. I am trying my best to keep notes about these quirks and save them in my Obsidian notes, but sometimes you don't do it and so on. So having this assistance figure out how to do it, oh boy, that's a time saver, right? Because you would find the information, but it takes a long time to do. That meant every time I made the change to the JavaScript, I had to recompile. The JS build cycle time took several minutes. Oh boy, I hate JavaScript compiling. So I avoided make changes to the JavaScript unless I absolutely had to. Okay. Why had I let the long feedback cycle persist for so long? It's not that I didn't want to fix the whole reload problem. I tried. Over the last few years, I've taken multiple runs and burning hours and becoming increasingly frustrated each time. I recognize this. I just couldn't figure it out. It wasn't just a simple error in my configuration, it was multiple issues. So I asked Cursor what the problem might be. It had ideas. The first few tries didn't work. Yeah. But each time Cursor had another idea. Ultimately we fixed both hot load configuration problems in less than an hour. Cursor had just paid for itself on the first day of my paid subscription, and just to be clear, I paid for the Cursor myself. This is not a paid post. Okay. The less good. Now that my local test server was picking up JavaScript and CSS changes, immediately I put Cursor to work on fixing my layouts. I quickly figured out that the key to making Cursor work for me was committing small frequent changes. Every time something started working, even if it wasn't done, I did a git commit. Yeah, this is a good habit anyway. This habit of making small local commits is something I normally do when TDDing, yeah, but it was even more important with Cursor, and I dialed the frequency of my commits up to 11. More than once I had to git reset hard because Cursor took things in a wildly unexpected direction. Okay, so I haven't used assistance that far to this extent. Sometimes Cursor went off the rails, touching files it had no business messing with. I learned to be specific at what I wanted changed, and just as importantly, what I didn't want it to touch. I discovered that adding without modifying any JavaScript to prompts ensured Cursor stuck to simpler CSS solutions. Yeah, so you need to get into this feedback. You also learn how to interact with the assistant, and there will be a learning curve here as well. Then there was the weird stuff. At one point, Cursor randomly decided to insert an architecture heading on a dashboard. It was an almost accurate heading and in the right general spot, but still, why? It was trying to be helpful, but I asked it to change the structure of the page, not the contents. That was my cue to tell it to stop making creative decisions on my behalf. Yes. The WTF. When I save a change to a file using a traditional IDE, that change stays put. Much to my surprise, that's not quite how Cursor works. I saw instances where I thought Cursor and I had made changes, but then those changes were undone. I wasn't sure what to make of that. Was in my imagination a side effect of a later prompt? But then Cursor did something I couldn't ignore or explain away. Backing up a step, I was keeping RubyMine open side by side with Cursor. Whenever I felt the itch to just fix something myself, I used RubyMine because it's the idea I'm most comfortable with. At one point, I manually added borders to debug a CSS layout issue the Cursor had been able to fix. Once I had done, I removed the borders, committed my changes, and returned to Cursor to start a new small change. I asked Cursor to do something completely unrelated to the previous CSS changes, and suddenly those diagnostic borders were back in all their bright red and green glory. One of the benefits of Gen AI is that you can ask the model what happened. So I asked Cursor why it reverted my changes. Okay, so it's one of the reasoning models. Cursor explained that it uses the version of the file it previously read, not the version saved to disk, as the starting point for future changes. Oh, so much for my quaint notions of file management. Yeah, I mean, if you're using two tools, these things will happen, these quirks. That's YOLO is good actually. I knew about YOLO mode, but I thought to myself, lol, no, what would I let an AI run rampant over my code? But I also wanted to continue using reset hard to revert cursor changes I didn't want to pursue. So it turns out YOLO mode is ironically the safest way for me to avoid the problem of cursor reverting its own changes. With YOLO turned on, Cursor auto-proves the changes it makes, so its internal version of the file and the file on disk are more likely to match. Of course, there is a catch. YOLO is marked dangerous for a reason, so I wanted to be specific about what Cursor was allowed to do on my behalf. I use the YOLO prompt allow file writes and web searches do not allow terminal commands, and they seem to do the trick. Even then, there's still one more step. If I make changes outside of Cursor, either with a git reset or by manually ending a file, Cursor could still have an older version of the file read into memory. Cursor helpfully suggested that I should tell it whenever I make manual edits to avoid having it work with stale data. I'll do that and also run git status that to verify I'm only seeing expected changes more often. Yeah, I can imagine this is a problem. Cursor is now, so next steps. Cursor is now my daily driver and I am absolutely blown away by its capabilities. And now this is the next sentence, is the one that I found the most interesting. With it, I'm not just 2 times or 10 times more productive. I'm infinitely more productive because I am willing to tackle projects I otherwise wouldn't dare try on my own. This summarizes my feeling as well. And it's more of a psychological factor than a technical thing. It's not going to replace me. Rather, it feels like wearing a mech suit. Tools that amplify your abilities. Without Cursor, the only way I would have added dark mode to the simulation was if I magically fell into a pile of money that enabled me to hire a team. But with Cursor, I can do a whole lot of heavy lifting all on my own. That said, Cursor is still clearly in its infancy. It crashes, it does weird things. More generally, Gen AI IDs have a learning curve. If you are not the kind of person who works in small steps naturally, it's a habit you're going to want to learn. It takes effort to craft prompts that yield the desired results. But if you learn how to set clear boundaries, watch for surprises, and keep a tight feedback loop, Gen AI IDs are an absolutely incredible force multiplier. And I think this summarizes really well what I wanted to say. These are not perfect tools. They have their own issues, and there are a lot of issues with AI in general. But they are really amplifying what we can do. And in particular, this psychological factor is the one that's the most important. I remember at some point there were some short animated movies for children, and one of them was with a duck that didn't know how to, or she thought she didn't know how to swim, and somebody told her, you just need to take a small piece of wood and it will keep you on top of the water. And of course, that wasn't true. That was only psychological, but it was enough to help her swim. It's basically my feeling with AI. It's okay, it's doing a little bit more than just the psychological factor, but to me, the most important part is the psychological factor. With this being said, I have no idea of the experience of a new developer, of a junior developer with these kinds of tools. Because the big potential issue you may fall into is that you let the tool do the work for you, but you don't know enough about simplifying the code, about making it better, about making it more maintainable and so on, that at some point things will get awry and you won't know enough about programming to fix it. So this seems to be the biggest trap, the trap of knowledge. You still need to know what you are doing. And one of the challenges is that with these tools, it's very, very comfortable for people to start writing programs without building the necessary knowledge and skill set to solve them, to know how to write good code. So that's the experience report about AI tools. What do you think about this? Let us know in the comments. We love comments, and particularly we love to learn more about this because I am working on a series of videos on AI usage for software architects. And I'm going to try it, and I'm trying it for various scenarios, and I want to create a series that will be pretty brief, but will help architects understand where to use, where not to use, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, so on. So yeah, let us know in the comments if you want to learn more about these experiences. If you have experience with using AI tools for programming and other parts of software development, let us know. And Ask your questions if you have any. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.